Hi guy, tonight we slip back through the centuries into the silent heart of feudal Japan. Picture a fortress garden, so perfectly symmetrical it almost hurts your eyes. Moonlight spills like milk over raked gravel and sculpted pines, and the air is thick with the scent of jasmine. A single bead of sweat traces a line down a samurai's temple, catching the light just like the polished steel of the katana in his hand. A secret midnight duel between two masterless Ronin shatters the peace of this perfect garden. When the dust settles, one man's fate is sealed, sparking a dangerous chain of events. A cowardly librarian, Tama, witnesses the forbidden fight and is unwillingly drawn into a world of betrayal and revenge. Let's be real, if you accidentally stumbled upon a secret samurai duel, your life expectancy would probably drop faster than a cherry blossom in a typhoon. If you enjoy these little trips back in time, a quiet like and subscribe is always deeply appreciated. It's always so cool to see where everyone is listening from, so feel free to share your city or country and what time it is for you. Asterisk, asterisk, turnt doned. Junk Lecker Prolo, Junk Don, Chapter 1. The Midnight Garden and a Librarian's Curiosity. The scroll you're supposed to be cataloging lies forgotten on the low desk. You are Tama Kawakami, and your official title is Librarian of the Shogun's Archive, which sounds far grander than the reality of being a glorified dust manager. From your paper screen window, the fortress garden is laid out below, a masterpiece of obsessive control. Every stone, every blade of grass, every ripple in the koi pond has its twin on the opposite side. It's the kind of design that suggests the gardener was maybe a little too into order. Tonight, however, the silver moonlight makes its eerie perfection feel less like peace and more like a held breath. And that's when you hear it. A whisper. Not the wind sighing through the pines or the rustle of a night creature. This is human, urgent and low, slicing through the heavy floral air. Your heart, a notoriously timid little bird, gives a flutter against your ribs. The sensible part of your brain, the part that ensures you file scrolls correctly and avoid upsetting grumpy officials, screams at you to slide the window shut and pretend you heard nothing. But then there's that other part of you, the curious part, the part that reads forbidden accounts of far-off lands and legendary battles. It's a very small part, but tonight, it's winning. You slide out of your sandals, your bare feet making no sound on the cool wooden floors of the archive. Creeping into the garden is a terrible idea. It's off limits after dusk. And yet, you find yourself pushing open the door, the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth rushing in to greet you. You move from shadow to shadow, your drab librarian's kimono blending perfectly with the darkness. The garden's rigid symmetry, usually so unsettling, is now your ally. For every perfectly placed lantern, there's a perfectly shaped shadow. For every sculpted bush, there's an ideal hiding spot. This is definitely not in the librarian job description, but here you are. The whispers grow clearer. You duck behind a magnificent black pine, its needles meticulously pruned into cloud-like shapes. It offers perfect cover. Your heart is now doing a frantic drum solo in your chest as two figures step into a small, raked gravel clearing. The moonlight catches one of them full in the face, and you recognize him instantly. Miyamoto Musashi. Except you don't know him as a legendary swordsman. To you, he's just Musashi, the hot-tempered stable-keeper who feeds the shogun's war horses. You've seen him arguing with merchants in the market, his voice a low growl, his patience seemingly shorter than a winter's day. He always smells faintly of horse and simmering rage. Tonight, though, he stands with a stillness that is far more terrifying than his usual temper. His hand rests loosely on the hilt of the long sword at his hip. His opponent is a complete mystery, a silhouette against the moon. Taller than Musashi, with a leaner build, the person stands with a kind of weary straightness, like a wooden beam that has borne too much weight for too long. You can't see a face, just a dark shape, but you feel a profound sadness radiating from them, a stark contrast to Musashi's coiled anger. You should not have come. Musashi's voice is a low rumble, devoid of its usual heat. It's cold. Colder than the stone lantern beside you. The silhouette shifts. A debt was made, Musashi-san. Betrayal has a price. The voice is softer, laced with a weariness that makes your own shoulders ache in sympathy. Honor demands this, Musashi counters. It is the only way. You press yourself flatter against the rough bark of the pine, barely daring to breathe. This isn't just an argument. This is a reckoning. You are witnessing something ancient and forbidden. a ritual of violence that has no place in this manicured, peaceful garden. The tension is a physical weight, a third presence in the clearing, and it's pressing down on you, stealing the air from your lungs. The two figures stand frozen for a long moment, a silent duel of wills under the impassive moon. Then, in a single, fluid motion, Musashi's hand tightens on his sword, and with a whisper of steel against lacquered wood, he begins to draw his blade. The sound is a long, drawn-out silver sigh. Asterisk, shing. Asterisk. It's a sound that doesn't belong here, a sound that splits the tranquil night in two. It's the sound of a decision made, a line crossed, your breath catches in your throat, a tiny, useless knot of air. The polished steel of Musashi's katana slides from its lacquered sheath, hungry for the moonlight. It drinks the silver glow, seeming to hum with a life of its own, a terrible, focused energy that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end. But the other figure doesn't move. They don't draw a weapon. They don't even flinch. They simply watch the blade emerge, their posture one of immense, profound stillness. Musashi completes the draw, the sword held low and ready, its tip pointed at the damp earth. The garden seems to shrink around them, the world reduced to this one small patch of raked gravel, the two figures, and the sliver of deadly moon metal that separates them. "This is your last chance to walk away," Musashi says, his voice a low vibration that you feel in the soles of your feet. The silhouette takes a single step forward, out of the deepest shadow, and into a dappled patch of moonlight filtering through the pine branches. And your world tilts on its axis. It's a woman. You know her. Not well, but you know her. It's Ruri Hojo, the roof thatcher. You've seen her dozens of times, perched precariously on the high beams of new buildings or the sagging roofs of old ones, her movements as deft and certain as a sparrow's. You've seen her in the market, her face smudged with dirt, haggling for rice with a quiet but firm determination. She always seemed so ordinary. Hard-working, yes. Sensitive, you might have guessed, from the way her eyes would sometimes linger on a sunset. But this? A duelist facing the stablekeeper's rage? It's unthinkable. The moonlight illuminates a face that is not hard or cruel, but etched with a deep and abiding sorrow. Her hands, you notice, are not the delicate hands of a court lady. They are strong, the knuckles slightly swollen, the palms calloused from her work with straw thatch and wooden mallets. She wears simple, dark work clothes, practical and worn, a stark contrast to the deadly elegance of the sword she faces. She has no weapon of her own, at least none that you can see. What is she doing? This isn't a duel. It's a sacrifice. Walking away is a luxury I lost a long time ago, Musashi-san. Ruri's voice is steady, but it carries the weight of 100 sleepless nights. You know that, you of all people. She looks past the gleaming sword, her eyes fixed on Musashi's face. "The land," she says, her voice barely a whisper, but it cuts through the night air like a razor. "The promise your father made to mine, on his honor." Musashi's jaw clenches. A muscle jumps in his cheek. "My father is dead. His promises died with him." "Honor does not die," Ruri counters, a spark of fire now in her tone. "It is either kept or it is betrayed. There is no third path." He swore an oath over the stream that marks the fields. He swore it on my father's service, a lifetime of loyalty. A memory, unbidden, flickers in the air between them. Or perhaps it's just in your mind. A story pieced together from their charged words. From the palpable history that hangs in the garden. The scent of jasmine and pine suddenly gives way to the smell of wet earth and growing rice. The perfectly manicured garden dissolves, and you are standing at the edge of a vast green paddy field, under a setting sun that bleeds orange and purple across the sky. It is 2 summers ago. The air is warm and thick with the buzz of cicadas. A younger Musashi stands beside an older man, his father, Lord Kenshin. Kenshin is paler, thinner than his son, with a cough that rattles in his chest, but his eyes hold a clear, unwavering light of authority. Musashi is not yet the simmering stable keeper. He is the proud son of a minor lord, his posture straight, his hand resting on the same sword, but with an air of youthful confidence, not cold fury. Facing them are 2 other people. A stooped, wiry man with kind eyes and hands as gnarled as oak roots, Ruri's father Ichiro, and beside him, Ruri herself. She is younger, her face unlined by the deep sorrow it now holds. She looks at the setting sun, at the fields, with a quiet hope, Her father has served Lord Kenshin's family his entire life, first as a soldier, then as a groundskeeper. His loyalty has been absolute. Ichiro, Lord Kenshin says, his voice weak but firm. My family has fallen on hard times. The shogun's favor is a fickle thing. I do not have much to leave my son. But a man's word is all he truly owns. He gestures with a frail hand towards the 3 rice paddies shimmering in the last light of day. They are the most fertile lands the family owns. My son knows my will. When I am gone, these fields are yours. For your lifetime of service. For your daughter, so she may have a dowry and a future. This I swear. Let the gods be my witness. Musashi, standing beside his father, gives a solemn, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze meets Ruri's for a fleeting moment. There is no anger there, only the shared understanding of a promise made, a debt of honor acknowledged between their families. Ruri's father, Ichiro, bows so low his forehead nearly touches his knees, his shoulders shaking with gratitude. It is more than just land. It is security. It is respect. It is a future. The memory shimmers and fades, the smell of the rice paddies replaced once more by the sterile scent of raked gravel and sculpted juniper. You are back in the garden, pressed against the rough bark of the pine. Your own heart aches with the phantom pain of that broken promise. Now you understand the weariness in Ruri's stance, the profound sadness in her eyes. Her father, Ichiro, passed away last winter. When she went to Musashi, whose own father had succumbed to his illness months before, she had not gone to beg. She had gone to see an oath fulfilled. But the Musashi she met was a different man. His family's title and lands had been stripped away by the shogun, leaving him with nothing but his swords, his pride, and a menial job tending horses. The promise, made in the golden light of a setting sun, was now a bitter reminder of everything he had lost. To give away the last valuable piece of his inheritance felt like the final, unbearable humiliation. My father was a sentimental old fool, Musashi snarls in the present, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. He promised what was not his to give. That land is all I have left of his name. Quote, he gave his word, Ruri insists, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. And you gave your silence, which was your consent. You watched him make the oath. You let my father die, believing his daughter would be cared for. You let me believe it. That is a betrayal that no land, no amount of rice can ever truly repay. But the land is the symbol. It is the honor. You realize with a cold dread that she has no intention of fighting him. She cannot win. She knows this. She is a roofer, not a warrior. She has come here to make a final stand, not with a sword, but with her own life. She is forcing him to confront the consequence of his broken oath in the most brutal, undeniable way possible. If he strikes her down, he proves her point. He will have traded his honor for 3 small fields of dirt. He will be a man who killed an unarmed woman to avoid a promise. If he walks away, he is a coward who cannot face the truth of his own actions. She has trapped him, not with steel, but with the unbreakable cage of his own shame. You shrink further into the shadows, a silent, terrified witness to a tragedy born of pride and poverty. This perfect garden, a symbol of order and control, has become the stage for the messiest of human emotions. The air is thick with the ghosts of fathers, the weight of dying words, the bitter taste of betrayal. Ruri takes another small step forward, her bare feet making no sound on the gravel. She is now less than 10 feet from him. She slowly raises her hands, showing him they are empty. It is a gesture of absolute vulnerability, of complete surrender. And yet, it is the most powerful move she could have made. So do it, Musashi-san, she says, her voice now calm, resigned. Prove what kind of man you are. Silence the debt. Let your blade be your answer. It is the only voice you seem to listen to anymore. Quote, Musashi's knuckles are white where he grips the hilt of his sword. A fine tremor runs through the blade, the moonlight catching the vibration. He is a cornered animal. His hot-tempered rage, the anger you've seen in the market, was just a shield. This is what lies beneath it. A deep, agonizing well of shame. He raises the katana, the silver arc beautiful and horrifying under the silent moon. The duel is not one of skill, you realize. It is a duel of souls, and it is about to reach its devastating conclusion. The air grows thin and cold, sucked into the vacuum created by Musashi's upraised sword. The polished steel seems to bleed moonlight. a river of cold fire poised to fall. From your hiding place, you can see the cords stand out on Musashi's neck, the terrible strain of a man at war with himself. His entire being is focused on this single downward cut, a strike intended not just to end a life, but to sever a bond, to erase a debt, to silence the nagging ghost of his own honor. Your mind screams for Ruri to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, a willing sacrifice on the altar of his shame. The sword begins its descent. It does not whistle. It hums, a low, predatory note that vibrates in your teeth. Time stretches, thick as honey. You see the arc of the blade, a silver scar against the blackness of the pine trees. You see Ruri's eyes, wide and unflinching, reflecting that deadly light. She does not move to evade. Instead, she drops. It is not a fall or a crumble, but a sudden, deliberate sinking motion. She goes to one knee, her dark work clothes pooling around her on the white gravel. The lethal tip of Musashi's katana slices through the empty air, where her heart had been a fraction of a second before, the force of the missed blow pulling him slightly off balance. The sound of the blade cleaving nothing but the night air is a sharp, frustrated hiss. And in that sliver of a moment as Musashi recovers, Ruri's right hand, which had been hidden in the folds of her kimono, flashes out. There is another whisper of steel, higher pitched, more subtle than the angry draw of the katana. Nane benshink. What she holds is a wakizashi, a short sword. Its blade is barely 1.5 feet long, a humble cousin to the grand katana, but in her hand, it looks like a natural extension of her will. Its hilt is wrapped in simple, dark cord, not ornate silk, and the steel is practical, honed for a purpose, not for show. She hadn't come to die. She had come to fight. Her empty hands had been a question. Musashi's strike had been the answer. Musashi lets out a guttural sound, a mix of surprise and fury. He had been denied his clean, brutal solution. This was no longer an execution. It was a duel. He spins, his sandals crunching and skidding on the raked gravel, marring the perfect, wave-like patterns. He brings the katana around in a wide, horizontal slash aimed to cut her in two, playing. The sound is shocking in the profound silence. It's not the resonant bell-like tone of a temple gong, but a sharp, biting impact that rings with furious energy. Ruri, still on one knee, has caught the massive blade of the katana on her own short sword. She holds it angled, not meeting the force head-on but deflecting it, sending a shower of tiny incandescent sparks into the night. The vibration travels up her arm, a shockwave of his rage, but her wrist does not buckle. Her entire body is braced, a study in focused resistance. The scent of hot, struck metal, sharp and ozonic, momentarily overpowers the jasmine. You press your cheek against the rough, cold bark of the pine, your own muscles tensed in sympathy. You are watching two opposing forces, two philosophies of combat. Musashi is a storm, a typhoon of raw power. His movements are large, fueled by a rage that seeks to overwhelm and obliterate. Every swing of his katana is a shout of frustration. Ruri, in contrast, is a stone in a river. She is all economy and precision. She cannot hope to match his strength, so she doesn't try. She yields, she redirects, she absorbs. She rises from her kneeling position in a single, fluid motion, not by pushing up, but by flowing with the momentum of his deflected blow. She is on her feet, the short sword held in a low, defensive guard, her feet planted, her body a coiled spring of potential energy. The duel begins in earnest. It is a terrifying, hypnotic dance on a stage of scarred white gravel. The air fills with a strange music, the sharp clink-shing of steel on steel, the soft, rhythmic huff-huff of their breathing, the whisper-soft scrape of their feet repositioning themselves on the stones. Hiss-tack! Musashi's blade darts forward in a lightning-fast thrust. Ruri sways to the side, a barely-there movement, and the tip of the katana passes inches from her ribs. With a turn of her wrist, she brings the flat of her wakizashi up to slap his blade aside, clack, creating an opening. For a fraction of a second, his chest is exposed. But she doesn't take the opening. This is not about killing him. This is about making him understand. He roars, a wordless sound of pure frustration, and unleashes a flurry of cuts. High, low, left, right. The katana becomes a silver web of light, a whirlwind of deadly intent. and Ruri moves within it. She is no longer just a stone. She is a leaf in that wind, never resisting its full force, but using its currents to move, to survive. Her short blade is a blur, a constant shield. It meets his katana, not with a clang, but with a series of soft guiding zimmerklings, and long, abrasive asterisks, scrapes asterisks as she parries, sliding her blade along his to bleed off the force of his attacks. You begin to notice the details. Musashi's grip on his sword is so tight his knuckles are bone white. His rage is his fuel, but it is also his poison. It makes him predictable. He attacks the memory of his father's weakness. He attacks the weight of his own lost status. He is not fighting the woman in front of him, he is fighting his own history, and it is making him sloppy. Ruri's grip, by contrast, is firm but fluid. Her calloused hands, the hands of a roofer, know the intimate language of leverage and balance. Her focus is absolute. Her sensitive eyes, the ones you'd seen watching sunsets, now track the tip of his sword with an unwavering intensity. She is not fighting with anger. She is fighting with grief, with a sorrow so profound it has been forged into something as hard and as sharp as tempered steel. Every block is a defense of her father's name. Every parry is an insistence on a promise made. The garden's perfect symmetry is now a memory. The raked gravel is a mess of scuffs, footprints, and deep gouges where a misplaced strike has buried itself in the earth. A low-hanging branch of a sculpted maple has been sheared clean through, its leaves fluttering down to the ground like silent green tears. The duel has scarred the landscape, just as the broken promise has scarred their lives. The fight shifts. The initial chaotic burst of Musashi's rage begins to fade, burned away by exertion. He is breathing heavily now, the sounds ragged. Sweat drips from his chin, and his movements, while still powerful, are losing their explosive speed. He is facing the reality that this woman, this roof thatcher, will not simply be broken by his fury. He is being forced to respect her skill, and it only infuriates him more. His style changes. He becomes more cunning. He feints, a deceptive lunge to the left, followed by a swift, low sweep aimed at her legs. The dance becomes more intricate, more dangerous. Ruri reads it. She leaps backward, her feet landing softly on the gravel with a sound like sighing sand. She uses the extra distance to her advantage. The katana is a weapon of reach and power. Her wakizashi is a weapon of the close press, of the grapple. He wants to keep her at the end of his blade. She needs to be inside that deadly arc. She moves forward, a low, gliding rush. Her blade isn't aimed at his body, it's aimed at his sword. Asterisk shrying. Asterisk. She slides her wakizashi from the base of his katana all the way to the hilt, her body moving with the blade. The sound is like a long, sharp nail being dragged across slate. It is a sound designed to unnerve, to disrupt his balance and his grip. For a moment, they are almost chest to chest, their faces inches apart in the moonlight. You see his eyes, wide with a new kind of shock. He is used to the respectful distance of a formal duel. This is something else. This is intimate, desperate. He can smell the scent of straw and hard work on her. He can see the profound, unshakable sorrow in her eyes. It is the face of his own dishonor, and it is too close. He shoves her back with his free hand, breaking the terrifying proximity. The endurance test has truly begun. The moon has climbed higher, casting shorter, starker shadows. The night is no longer silent, but filled with the sound of their labored breaths, a counterpoint to the sharp song of their blades. You watch, mesmerized and terrified, as the battle ebbs and flows. A lunge, a parry, a retreat, a feint, a block, a repositioning. It has a hypnotic, deadly rhythm. You notice the weakness in Ruri's style. Her defense is superb, but she has launched no true attacks. She is wearing him down, yes, but she is also wearing herself out. The wakizashi is a lighter blade, but the effort of constantly deflecting the heavier katana is taking its toll. A faint tremor has begun in her left arm. Musashi sees it too. A cruel, triumphant smile touches his lips for a second. His rage has found a new focus, her exhaustion. He begins a new assault, not with the wild, unfocused anger from before, but with a relentless, pressing sequence of attacks designed to batter her guard, to exhaust her muscles, to find the single inevitable crack in her defense. Clang, 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 work has privatized. The sounds are heavier now, less precise. They are the sounds of a hammer on an anvil. He is trying to beat her into submission. Ruri is forced backward, step by step. Her feet crunch on the gravel, a slow, grudging retreat. She is no longer a leaf in the wind, but a wall, and the wall is beginning to crumble. She is fighting on pure spirit now, her body screaming in protest. The debt, the promise, the memory of her father's trusting face. This is the fuel that keeps her arm raised, her blade steady against the onslaught. But fuel, eventually runs out. Musashi raises his katana high for a powerful two-handed overhead strike, a blow meant to shatter her blade and her will in one final declarative act. This is it. The end. Ruri's eyes widen, not in fear, but in grim acceptance. She sets her feet, ready to meet the blow, to make her final stand. The moonlight catches the sweat on her brow, making it look like a string of tiny diamonds. A final, beautiful ornament for a woman who fought for honor and was about to die for it. The sword falls. A screaming arc of silver death. It does not seem to cut through the air, but to tear it, to rip a hole in the fabric of the night. You squeeze your eyes shut, a coward's reflex, unable to watch the final, brutal punctuation of this tragic sentence. You hear the deep, guttural cry from Musashi as he puts all his remaining strength, all his frustration, all his shame into the blow. You hear the whisper of Ruri's breath, a final exhalation. But the sound you expect, the sickening, wet thud of steel meeting flesh, never comes. Instead, there is a cataclysmic crack, THOOM asterisk, followed by the sharp, ringing protest of metal. Your eyes fly open. The world is a tableau of frozen violence. Musashi's katana is not buried in Ruri. It is embedded deep in the stone heart of an ancient, moss-covered garden lantern that stood just behind her. The lantern has split in two, its stone cap tumbling to the gravel with a heavy crunch. The blade is stuck, vibrating with a furious, high-pitched hum, a trapped hornet. Musashi's strike went wide. In that last, final fraction of a second, he had pulled the blow, shifting its trajectory from her neck to the unfeeling stone beside her. He stands over her, his chest heaving, his body locked in the follow-through of his strike. His face, illuminated by the undamaged half of the lantern where the candle still flickers, is a mask of utter confusion and disbelief. Ruri is still on her feet, but just barely. The force of the displaced air from the blow has pushed her back a step. Her defensive posture has collapsed. Her arms hang limply, the wakizashi held loosely in her right hand, its tip touching the gravel. She is completely spent. Her head is bowed, her hair falling forward to obscure her face. But as she sways, the collar of her simple dark kimono, torn slightly during the fight, gapes open. And there, on the delicate skin of her collarbone, is a scar. It's not the clean line of a blade. It is an old burn, a puckered, starburst-shaped mark of pale, silvery tissue against her skin. It is a mark of ancient, searing pain. From your hiding spot, it's just a detail. But to Musashi, who is staring down at it, it is everything. The fury drains from his face, replaced by a dawning, slack-jawed shock. His knuckles, still white around the hilt of his trapped sword, loosen. Where? His voice is a choked whisper. All the rage and bluster gone, leaving only a hollow, rattling sound. Where did you get that mark? Quote, Ruri slowly, painfully, lifts her head. Her eyes are not the eyes of a triumphant duelist, nor a defeated one. They are filled with a sorrow so vast it seems to have no bottom. The same place you did, Musashi-san, she says, her voice ragged with exhaustion. The same night, the same fire. Musashi wrenches his katana free from the broken lantern with a grating shriek of metal on stone. He doesn't raise it again. He lets the tip fall to the gravel, holding the sword like a walking stick, a sudden old man. Fire? What fire? I don't remember. You were a child, Ruri says, her voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. A boy of 6. Your memory protects you from it. But my father never forgot, and neither did yours. Her words are a key, unlocking a door in your own mind, a door you didn't even know was there. The garden, the duel, the cold moonlight, it all dissolves. The scent of jasmine is scoured away by the acrid stench of smoke and burning pine. You are no longer in a pristine fortress garden. You are in the mud and chaos of a fortified camp at the edge of a great forest. It is 20 years ago. The sky is not black and silver, but a terrifying, roiling canvas of orange and red. An ambush. A surprise night attack has turned the orderly camp into a vision of hell. The air is filled with the screams of men, the clash of steel, and the hungry roar of fire as it leaps from tent to tent, from tree to tree. You see a younger, desperate Lord Kenshin, his face black with soot, his fine armor dented and scorched. He is not a lord. He is a hunted animal, trying to shepherd his men through a collapsing battle line. Beside him, not as a servant, but as a fellow warrior in worn but functional armor, is Ichiro, Ruri's father. He is not a stooped groundskeeper. He is a formidable man, his face grim, his movements economical and deadly as he cuts down an enemy soldier. "My son!" Kenshin screams over the din, his eyes wild with panic. "Where is Tamao?" Quote, he uses a childhood name for Musashi, a name of affection. He points toward a small command tent, now perilously close to a line of burning pines. A flaming branch, heavy and thick as a man's thigh, cracks and falls, blocking the entrance. Ichiro doesn't hesitate. He sheathes his sword and plunges toward the fire. He tears at the burning canvas with his bare hands, his face a mask of determination. Inside, a small boy, a 6-year-old Musashi, is huddled under a low table, his hands over his ears, his body shaking uncontrollably. Beside him, clutching a wooden doll, is an even smaller girl with wide, terrified eyes. Ruri, no more than 4 years old. Her father had kept her close, even in the camp, a common practice for a widower with no one else. As Ichiro rips the tent open, a burning pine tree nearby finally gives way, its trunk groaning in agony. It crashes down, sending a shower of red-hot embers and flaming debris raining over them. Ichiro acts on pure instinct. He throws his own body over the 2 children, creating a living shield. He grunts in pain as embers land on his back, his armor sizzling. A single, large ember glowing with a malevolent orange light slips past his shoulder. It falls onto the shared space between the 2 children. There is a searing sound, and 2 small screams are lost in the greater noise of the battle. Ichiro gathers them both up, one under each arm, ignoring his own pain, and sprints from the collapsing, fiery tent. He delivers the children into Lord Kenshin's arms before turning back to the fight. Later, when the chaos has subsided into a grim, smoldering defeat, you see them in the gray light of dawn. Lord Kenshin's clan is shattered. His lands are lost, his men dead or scattered. He is a lord of nothing now. He kneels in the mud beside Ichiro, whose back is a ruin of terrible burns. Kenshin is tending to the 2 crying children. On the collarbone of his son, Tamao, is a fresh, angry burn. On the collarbone of Ichiro's daughter, Ruri, is an identical one. A shared scar from a shared trauma, sealed in fire and defeat. "You saved him," Kenshin says, his voice thick with unshed tears. "You saved my line." "My name is Ash, Ichiro. I have nothing left." Quote, "We have our lives," Ichiro replies, his voice strained with pain. "That is not nothing." "Your life as a samurai is over," Kenshin says, the words tasting like poison. "They will hunt down every man who wore my colors. You must disappear. Become a farmer, a thatcher, anything. Forget you ever held a sword." He looks at Ichiro, his eyes filled with a desperate, burning sincerity. "But I will not forget. One day I will recover something of my family's name, and when I do, a debt of blood must be paid, not with blood, but with honor. My son's life for your daughter's future. The best land I ever own will be hers. A promise made not between a lord and his retainer, but between brothers. On my son's life, which is now your gift, I swear it." Quote, the memory dissolves, the smell of smoke finally clearing, leaving you back in the cold, clean air of the moonlit garden. Musashi stands frozen, the katana hanging from his hand like a dead weight. The scar on Ruri's collarbone is no longer just a mark. It is a testament. It is history. The story isn't just about his father's sentimental promise. It's about a life debt of the most profound kind. The land was not a gift. It was the barest minimum of repayment for his own survival. His hot-tempered rage, his simmering resentment, his bitter pride, it all looks so small now, so petty in the face of this revelation. He wasn't defending his inheritance. He was hoarding the payment for his own life, a life saved by the man whose daughter he had just tried to kill. The shame he felt before was a shallow pond. This is an ocean, and he is drowning in it. "My father," Musashi whispers, the name catching in his throat. He looks from the scar on her skin to the sword in his hand, and a wave of nausea seems to pass through him. He has been fighting the wrong battle his entire life. He saw Ichiro as a symbol of his family's downfall, a former warrior reduced to a groundskeeper, just as Musashi was a lord's son reduced to a stable-keeper. He never once imagined that Ichiro's humble life was a sacrifice made to protect him. Ruri watches him, her exhaustion warring with a lifetime of guarded sorrow. She did not come here for revenge. She came for recognition. For him to see her father for who they truly were. She had tried words, and they had failed. So she had spoken the only other language he seemed to understand. The language of steel. Every block, every parry had been a sentence in a story he refused to hear. He never spoke of it, Ruri says, her voice soft now, almost gentle. His pride wouldn't allow it. He served your father faithfully in his new life, never mentioning the old one. He believed Lord Kenshin's honor was absolute. He died believing it. She takes a small, shaky step forward, her eyes locked on his. The land is just dirt and water, Musashi-san. It is the promise that gives it meaning. It is the memory. It is the life you are living. Musashi makes a choked sound and stumbles back, away from her, away from the truth. He drops the katana. It clatters onto the gravel with a final discordant sound, loud and ugly in the sudden, profound silence of the garden. He looks at his own hands, as if he's never seen them before, as if they are the hands of a monster. You, hidden in the shadows, feel the cold night air on your skin as if for the first time. The entire conflict has been rewritten. Ruri is not an antagonist seeking to beggar a fallen noble. She is the keeper of a sacred trust. Musashi is not just a prideful bully reneging on a deal. He is a man tragically ignorant of his own history, haunted by a shame whose true source he never knew. This isn't a duel between heroes and villains. It's a tragedy, spun from the threads of honor, sacrifice, and a silence kept for far too long. The perfect, symmetrical garden lies scarred and broken around them, a perfect metaphor for the beautifully constructed lies that have just been torn apart. He looks at his own hands as if they are the hands of a stranger, hands that belong to a murderer who has just been shown a reflection of his own soul and found it wanting. He sees the calluses from the stable work, the knuckles scarred from pointless brawls in the market, the skin ingrained with the dirt of a life he resents. But now, overlaid on that image, he sees the phantom heat of a long-forgotten fire, the ghost of an ember, the genesis of a debt he never knew he owed. You watch your own body, a single rigid muscle of tension, as this new knowledge works its way through him. It is not a gentle dawn of understanding. It is a violent earthquake, shattering the very foundations of his identity. His pride, the towering, fearsome fortress he had built around himself, crumbles into dust. The hot-tempered rage that was his constant companion, his shield and his weapon, is revealed for what it truly was. The desperate, terrified roar of a boy trapped in a burning tent, a boy who had forgotten the very person who pulled him from the flames. Ruri does not press her advantage. She does not mock him or lecture him. She simply stands there, swaying with an exhaustion so profound it seems to be the only thing holding her upright. Her work is done. She has carried this truth for years, a weight far heavier than any bale of thatch, and now she has finally set it down at his feet. She watches him, her sensitive eyes, which had tracked his blade with such fierce precision, now holding only a vast, weary compassion. It is a terrible thing to watch a man's world fall apart, even if it is a world built on your own family's pain. Musashi takes a shuddering breath, a ragged, painful sound that seems to tear at his throat. He looks from his hands to the scar on Ruri's collarbone, a pale star in the moonlight. He looks at her face, no longer the face of an adversary, but the face of a shared history, a history of fire and sacrifice. He looks at the broken lantern, its stone heart cleaved by his misdirected fury. He looks at his katana, lying on the gravel like a dead silver snake. Then he moves. It is not a lunge or a retreat. It is a collapse. His knees, which had held him firm through the brutal dance of the duel, give way. He falls, not with the grace of a warrior, but with the dead weight of a man whose spirit has been severed from his limbs. His knees hit the sharp white gravel with a heavy, sickening crunch that you hear even from your hiding place behind the pine. He is on his knees before her, a samurai, the proud son of a minor lord, kneeling in the dirt and ruin of the garden before a roof thatcher. The moonlight illuminates the scene, bleaching it of all color, turning it into a stark etching of shame and absolution. Musashi's head is bowed so low, his forehead nearly touches the ground. His broad shoulders, which had strained with such power moments before, are now shaking with silent, racking sobs. The sounds are broken, choked, the sounds of a grief 20 years old finally finding a voice. He reaches out a trembling hand, not towards her, but towards the discarded katana. His fingers wrap around the silk-bound hilt. For a terrifying second, you think he might turn it on himself, a final, desperate act of a man who cannot live with his own dishonor. Your heart leaps into your throat. But he doesn't. He pushes himself up slightly, still on his knees, and holds the sword out to her. Not by the hilt, as a warrior would offer his weapon to an equal, but by the blade. He holds the sharp, lethal steel in his bare hands, his palms pressed against the flat sides, and offers her the hilt. It is the ultimate gesture of surrender. He is not just giving her the weapon. He is giving her his life, his power, his very identity as a swordsman, and acknowledging her right to take it. His hands tremble, and you can see a thin, dark line of blood begin to well up where the razor-sharp edge presses into his skin. "The debt!" he chokes out, the words mangled by his sobs. "The debt is mine." It is a full confession. It is an apology. It is a plea. Ruri looks down at the offered sword, at the blood welling on his hands. She looks at his bowed head, at the shaking shoulders of the man who had just tried to kill her. There is no triumph in her eyes. The fire of her grief has burned down to embers, leaving only a deep, abiding sorrow for them both, for the long, wasted years of silence and misunderstanding. She shakes her head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "No," she whispers, her voice raspy with exhaustion. She reaches out with her own hands, her strong, calloused roofer's hands, but she does not take the sword. Instead, she gently places her hands over his, her fingers curling around his bloody fists. She carefully, deliberately, pushes the sword back towards him, turning it so the hilt faces him once more. "The debt was never for a sword," she says, her voice growing stronger, clearer, imbued with the simple, unshakable authority of the truth. "It was never for blood. My father did not save a swordsman. He saved a boy. Lord Kenshin did not promise me your life. He promised me a future." She lets go of his hands, leaving the katana resting in his lap. She takes a half step back, giving him space, giving him air. "Honor is not in the steel you hold, Musashi-san," she continues, her gaze unwavering. "It is in the promise you keep. That is the lesson my father taught me. It is the lesson your father wanted for you. Keep your sword. You will need it. But keep the promise, too." Quote. Her words hang in the cold night air, simple, profound, and absolute. They are the final verdict, the closing statement in a trial that has lasted a generation. She has not come to take his honor. She has come to give him a chance to reclaim it. She has not come to destroy him, but to remind him of who he is meant to be. Musashi slowly, painfully lifts his head. His face is a wreck. It's streaked with tears and dirt. His eyes red and swollen. The fierce, angry mask he wore is gone, and in its place is the lost, confused face of the 6-year-old boy from the fire. He looks at Ruri, truly looks at her, and for the first time he doesn't see a nuisance or an antagonist. He sees the little girl who huddled beside him under a table. He sees the daughter of the man who shielded them both. He sees the keeper of a truth he was too proud and too blind to see for himself. He closes his eyes, and a single final tear traces a path through the grime on his cheek. He gives a slow, deep nod. It is not the solemn, confident nod from the memory in the rice paddy. It is the broken, humble nod of a man remade. The tension in the garden, the suffocating electric weight that had pressed down on you for what felt like an eternity, finally breaks. It doesn't vanish, but it transforms, like the breaking of a fever. The air feels lighter, cleaner, though it is still filled with the scent of scarred earth and the faint, coppery smell of Musashi's blood. The duel is over, not with a killing blow, but with a shared memory. Not with a victor and a vanquished, but with two survivors of a long and painful war, finally finding their way to a truce. Musashi remains kneeling on the gravel, the sword resting across his thighs. He makes no move to stand. He is a statue of broken pride. Ruri sways on her feet, her strength finally giving out. She leans a hand against the scarred trunk of the maple tree, its sheared-off branch a testament to the violence that has just passed. She closes her eyes, her body trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline and exhaustion. They remain that way for a long time. Two silent figures in a broken garden, caught in the quiet aftermath of a storm. The perfect symmetry is gone forever, replaced by something truer, something messier. The gravel is scarred, the lantern is broken, a tree is wounded. But the lies have been broken too. The silence has been shattered. And in the ruins, under the cold, impassive light of the moon, something new and fragile has been born. A promise, once forgotten, is now remembered. An honor, once lost, has been found. You, Tama Kawakami, the cowardly librarian, slowly let out a breath you didn't realize you had been holding for the entire duel. Your heart, which had been a frantic drum, begins to slow to a painful, heavy beat. You had crept into the garden seeking a sliver of excitement, a story to tell yourself. Instead, you have witnessed a profound and terrible lesson. You have seen how honor can be a poison, and how truth, wielded with courage, can be a cure. The world of scrolls and dust you inhabit seems a universe away. You are no longer just a librarian. You are a witness. And you know, with a certainty that settles deep in your bones, that the story of the fortress garden is not over. It has only just begun. The night holds its breath. The echoes of the fight, the clang of steel, the grunts of exertion, the final, dreadful crack of shattering stone, do not fade so much as they are absorbed by the profound, waiting silence. The garden, which moments ago was a vortex of violent energy, is now unnervingly still. The moon, which had been a harsh spotlight on a stage of conflict, now seems to offer a gentler, more compassionate glow, as if it too is relieved the worst has passed. From your hiding place, the air you draw into your lungs is a complex and sorrowful perfume. The sweet, heady scent of night-blooming jasmine is still there, a constant reminder of the garden's intended peace, but it is now tainted, interwoven with the sharp, metallic tang of struck steel, the acrid dust of shattered rock, and beneath it all, the faint, coppery scent of Musashi's blood, which seems to stain the very air. You risk a glance around the edge of the pine, your body still thrumming with a phantom terror. The garden is a ruin. A masterpiece of obsessive control has been undone by the messy, unpredictable force of human feeling. The pristine white gravel, once raked into perfect, wave-like patterns, is now a chaotic mess of scuffs, gouges, and deep, uneven footprints that tell the story of the duel's desperate dance. The sheared-off maple branch lies on the ground like a severed limb, its leaves already beginning to wilt. And the ancient stone lantern, the garden's stoic heart, is cleaved in two, its quiet, flickering light now spilling from a jagged wound. The perfect symmetry is gone, and you realize with a startling clarity that it was never real. It was a fragile illusion, a denial of the chaos that lies just beneath the surface of all things. This broken, scarred landscape feels truer, more honest. You watch the two figures who broke it. They are statues in the moonlight, monuments to their own private war. Musashi is a study in surrender. He remains on his knees, a position of ultimate humility, the great katana resting uselessly across his thighs. His head is still bowed, his face hidden, but you can see the faint tremor that still runs through his powerful shoulders. He is a fortress that has been breached not by force, but by a single, devastating truth. He does not move to retrieve his pride. He kneels within its rubble. Across from him, Ruri leans against the wounded maple tree. Her strength has fled, her body boneless with a bone-deep exhaustion that goes far beyond the physical. The wakizashi hangs from her hand, its tip buried in the gravel as if it has become too heavy to hold. Her face is turned slightly towards the moon, and her eyes are closed. Her expression is not one of victory. There is no triumph there, no satisfaction. There is only a vast, hollowed-out relief, the quiet that comes after a lifetime of carrying a terrible weight. She has won, but the cost of the battle is written in every line of her weary posture. She did not seek to destroy a man, only to make him see, and the sight has destroyed him all the same. The space between them is no longer a dueling ground, but a fragile, sacred space of shared grief. Slowly, carefully, you pull back from the tree, your bare feet making no sound on the cool earth beneath the pine. You slip away, moving from shadow to shadow, retreating from the raw, intimate power of the scene. You slide back into the archive, the paper screen closing behind you with a soft rustle, shutting out the scent of blood and jasmine, but you cannot shut out what you have seen. You are back in your world of scrolls and ordered shelves, but the order feels different now. It feels like a lie. You sink down at your low desk, the forgotten scroll lying where you left it. Your hands are shaking. Your heart feels too large for your chest. You, Tama Kawakami, the coward, the observer, went looking for a story and found a truth so profound it has shaken the very foundations of your understanding. You have spent your life among the official histories, tales of great battles, noble lords, and clear-cut victories. Their stories of honor defined by a sword, of loyalty proven in death, of enemies and allies painted in stark black and white. What you witnessed in the garden was none of those things. It was a story painted in shades of gray, a battle where the most powerful weapon was not a blade, but a scar. You think of Musashi, a man you knew only as a hot-tempered stable-keeper, his anger a simple, uncomplicated thing. Now you see that his rage was a cage he had built around a secret sorrow, a prison to keep his own forgotten history at bay. His idea of honor was a shield. It was about preserving the name of his father, about clinging to the last vestiges of a lost status. It was brittle, defensive, and ultimately hollow. It was an honor that would have let him kill an unarmed woman to protect his pride, a pride built on a lie. He was so desperate to defend the ashes of his family's name that he never stopped to ask how those ashes were made. And Ruri. You knew her as a roof thatcher, a woman of the working class, silent and hardworking. You see now that her silence was not submission. It was a vessel, containing a truth she knew the world was not ready to hear. Her honor was not a shield. It was a root, sunk deep into the soil of memory and sacrifice. It was the promise her father died believing in. It was the life debt owed by another. It was a truth so powerful that she was willing to walk into the path of a sword to see it acknowledged. She fought not for land, not for rice, but for the meaning behind them. Her every parry was a word. Her every block was a sentence. The entire duel was a conversation he refused to have, and she forced him to listen with the language of steel because it was the only one he spoke. This, you realize, is the true nature of the conflicts that shape the world, the ones that never get written into the official scrolls you catalog. They are not grand clashes between armies for the glory of a shogun. They are the intimate, desperate duels fought in the dark, between two people bound by a shared past. They are fought over a handful of fields, over a forgotten promise, over a scar left by a fire 20 years ago. This is where the real history of Japan is written, in the quiet sacrifices, the long-held silences, the depths of the heart. The duel was a microcosm of the world outside the fortress walls. A world of rigid class structures, where a samurai's son cannot bear the shame of his fall, and a roofer's daughter must risk death just to be heard. A world where honor has become so entangled with pride and status that its true meaning, simple integrity, the keeping of one's word, has been lost. Musashi, in his blind pride, was a perfect product of his time. He saw Ruri not as a person with a history, but as a threat to his precarious social standing. To him, her claim was an insult, a commoner demanding something from a man of a fallen but still noble house. He could not see the truth, because the rules of his world blinded him. Ruri had to break those rules. She had to step outside the bounds of her class, her gender, her station. She had to bring a weapon into a garden of peace and challenge a samurai to a duel she could not possibly win on his terms. She had to be the antagonist to become the hero of her own story, to force a reckoning that society would never have allowed. And you are the witness. You are the one who saw the perfect symmetry break. The librarian who reads the dead, polished words of the past has now seen how messy and alive history truly is. You have learned that true strength is not the furious power that can cleave a stone lantern in two. It is the quiet, enduring resilience that can bear a truth for 20 years. It is the courage to face a drawn sword with nothing but a story. And perhaps, most profoundly, it is the strength to fall to your knees when you realize you are wrong, to offer up your blade, to bleed, and to begin again. Musashi, in his final broken surrender, showed a different kind of courage, a kind you suspect is far rarer and more difficult than the courage to fight. You look at your own hands, soft and clean from handling paper and ink. You have always valued your quiet, safe life. You have always believed that courage was for other people, for the heroes in the scrolls. But tonight, you have seen that courage comes in many forms. There is the courage of Ruri, who fought for a truth. There is the courage of Musashi, who finally surrendered to it. And perhaps you think, with a dawning sense of unease and wonder, there is another kind of courage too. The courage of the witness, the one who sees and remembers and understands, the one who has the responsibility to ensure the real story is not forgotten. The first hint of gray is beginning to soften the eastern sky. A new day is coming. For Musashi and Ruri, it will be the first day of their new reality, a world where the past has finally been spoken aloud. And for you, it is the first day of a life in which you know that the most important histories are not found in the archives, but are lived and fought in the secret moonlit gardens of the human heart. Dawn crept into the fortress garden like a timid intruder, its pale gray light touching the edges of the devastation. It found Musashi still kneeling, a statue carved from shame. The cold of the morning had seeped through his clothes, into his bones, a deep, internal chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. His knees were a raw, screaming agony, the sharp points of the gravel having ground themselves into his flesh. The blood on his hands from where he had gripped his own blade had dried into tight, dark crusts, the skin beneath them stinging with a pain that felt distant, insignificant. The world had been remade in the night, and he no longer knew his place in it. He did not know how long Ruri had been gone. After her final, simple words, the world had seemed to go silent and distant. He had only a vague memory of her turning and walking away, her form swallowed by the same shadows she had emerged from, leaving him alone with the wreckage of the garden and the smoking ruin of his life. Slowly, as if moving a body that was not his own, he pushed himself up. His legs nearly buckled, and a groan of pure physical misery escaped his lips. He stood, swaying, in the center of the chaos he had created. The rising sun caught the jagged edges of the broken lantern, the torn leaves of the maple, the deep scars in the earth. He saw it all as a reflection of his own soul, a once proud thing, now shattered and ugly. He bent down and picked up the katana. It felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight of shame. The silk on the hilt was sticky with his own blood. The sword, the symbol of his lineage, his skill, his identity, now felt like a stranger's weapon, a tool he had used for a monstrous purpose. The walk back to the stables was the longest journey of his life. The fortress was beginning to stir. A pair of guards, their spears held loosely, stopped and stared as he emerged from the forbidden garden. Their eyes were wide, taking in his disheveled state, the blood on his hands, the dead look in his eyes. He was used to being watched, with fear, with resentment, with grudging respect. This was different. This was the gawking stare one gives a mad dog or a public disgrace. He heard one of them whisper to the other, the words lost but the tone, a mix of shock and mockery, as sharp as any blade. He kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead, but he could feel the world shifting around him. A kitchen maid, carrying a basket of vegetables, saw him and scurried away, her eyes wide with fear. Two officials, their robes immaculate, stopped their conversation to follow him with cold, disapproving glares. The whispers followed him like a cloud of flies. The stable keeper destroyed Lord Nagano's prized garden, heard he attacked a woman. Each overheard snippet was a stone thrown at his already broken pride. They had the story wrong, but in a way, their version was kinder than the truth. They saw him as a man who had lost his temper. The truth, that he was a man who had lost his honor, who had tried to murder the daughter of the man who saved his life, was a burden he would have to carry alone. When he finally reached the stables, the familiar scent of horse, hay, and warm earth offered no comfort. It was simply the smell of his life, a life he now saw with excruciating clarity. It was the life of a man hiding from a debt, a man whose daily anger was just the noise he made to drown out the silence of a forgotten promise. The horses turned their great, placid heads as he entered. Their eyes were large, brown, and uncomplicated. They saw a man who brought them food and water. They knew nothing of honor or shame, of fire or scars. He ran a hand down the powerful neck of a black warhorse, the coarse hair rough against his palm. The animal's simple, honest presence was a silent accusation. An older stable hand, Kenji, a man with a face like a worn leather pouch, was sweeping straw. He stopped and looked Musashi up and down, his gaze lingering on the bloodied hands. "Rough night, Musashi-san?" Kenji asked, his voice carefully neutral. Musashi could not speak. The words were locked in his throat behind a wall of shame. He just shook his head and moved past, towards the small, rough-hewn ladder that led to his loft. "The head gardener was here at first light," Kenji called after him, his voice low. "Screaming like a stuck pig. Said the shogun would have someone's head for what was done to his precious lantern. Best you lay low." Lay low. It was what he had been doing his entire adult life, hiding in a shell of resentment. He climbed the ladder, his muscles protesting every movement. His room was a small, bare space with a sleeping mat and a single chest for his few belongings. He sank onto the mat, the katana clattering to the wooden floor beside him. He sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, while the sounds of the fortress waking up filtered in from outside. His memory, which he had always thought of as a clear, sharp thing, was now a treacherous landscape. The fire, which had been a complete blank, was beginning to return to him, not as a coherent narrative, but in terrifying sensory flashes. The smell of burning pine, so thick it choked him, the color orange, a blinding, roaring wall of it. The terror of being small and trapped. A scream, his own, a strong arm hooking under his, pulling him. The face of the man was lost in smoke and shadow, but he remembered the feeling of being shielded, of being carried through chaos to safety. He remembered crying, a child's desperate, helpless sobs. And he remembered a small girl beside him, clutching a doll, her eyes as wide and terrified as his own. Ruri. The knowledge was a physical sickness. He leaned over, his stomach heaving, but there was nothing to come up. It was a dry, hollow nausea. His father, Kenshin. He had always remembered his father in his last years as a weak, sentimental man, haunted by their family's fall from grace, clinging to foolish notions of honor while his son scraped a living, tending to other men's horses. He had resented his father for it. Now he saw his father's actions in a new light. The quiet insistence on honor, the talk of debts that must be paid. It wasn't the rambling of a broken man. It was the guiding principle of a man who knew the true weight of a life debt. He had been trying to teach Musashi a lesson he was too proud and angry to learn. Honor is not in the steel you hold. It is in the promise you keep. Ruri's words echoed in the small, silent room. He looked at his hands again. These were the hands that had learned the sword from his father. They were strong, skilled, deadly. And they were the hands that had tried to kill the woman who shared his scar, his trauma, the very reason for his life. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The rage was gone. His famous, hot-tempered anger, the thing that had defined him, had been burned away, leaving only this vast, cold, empty space. He was adrift. His identity as a proud, wronged samurai was a lie. His belief in his own righteous anger was a delusion. Who was he, if not that man? He was the son of Kenshin. He was the boy saved by Ichijiro. He was the man who owed a debt. That simple, terrible clarity was the first solid thing he had been able to hold on to since the duel. It was not a comforting thought, but it was a true one. And it was a beginning. A path. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He went to a small bucket of water in the corner and began to wash the blood from his hands. The water turned a pale, rusty pink. He scrubbed until his skin was raw, but he knew he could never wash away the stain. He then unlaced his torn and dirty kimono. Underneath, on the skin of his own collarbone, he traced the faint, silvery outline of a scar he had carried his entire life, and never once questioned. A burn. He had always assumed it was from some childhood accident, too mundane to remember. Now it was a brand, a permanent reminder. He put on a simple, clean set of work clothes. He left the katana, his family's sword, lying on the floor of the loft. It was not his to carry. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He climbed back down the ladder. Kenji watched him, a question in his old eyes. But Musashi walked past him without a word, and out of the stables, into the full light of the morning. He did not walk towards the market or the training yard. He walked towards the main gate of the fortress. His steps were no longer the swagger of a man daring the world to challenge him, but the quiet, determined steps of a man on a pilgrimage. He knew where he was going. The 3 rice paddies, shimmering under the sun that his father had promised away. The land he had been willing to kill for. He walked through the castle town, past the merchants setting up their stalls, past the samurai on official business, past the women gossiping by the well. He was invisible to them now, just another workman in drab clothes. The fear and respect he had once commanded were gone, and he felt their absence not as a loss, but as a relief. He was no longer playing a part. The promise was the only thing that was real. The land was just dirt and water, as Rory had said, but it was the symbol. It was the beginning of repayment. Giving it up was not an act of charity or a humiliation. It was the first step towards rebuilding his honor, not from the ashes of his family's name, but from the solid ground of a promise kept. It was a terrifying prospect. It meant embracing a poverty even deeper than what he already knew. It meant truly letting go of the last phantom of his noble past. But it was the only path forward. His path. The one his father had tried to show him, and the one Rory, with sorrow and steel, had finally forced him to see. He walked on, his face set, a man leaving one life behind, and taking the first painful step into another. The shadows that had been her allies in the garden now felt like thin, clinging shrouds. Rory moved through the pre-dawn stillness of the castle town, a ghost haunted by the events of the night. Each step was a deliberate effort, a command sent to a body that was threatening mutiny. Her arms, from her wrists to her shoulders, were a symphony of deep, aching pain. The memory of every one of Musashi's blows, caught and deflected by her short sword, was now imprinted on her muscles as a throbbing, fiery protest. The adrenaline that had sharpened her senses and fueled her defiance had drained away, leaving behind a hollow vessel, a profound weariness that felt as if it had settled in her very bones. She did not look at the faces she passed in the dim light, the early rising tofu seller, the watchman finishing his patrol. She kept her gaze on the dusty ground, focusing on the simple act of placing one foot in front of the other. The walk from the fortress to her small house on the town's edge had never felt so long. It was a journey across a vast, empty plain of exhaustion. The weight of the wakizashi at her hip, a weapon she hadn't drawn in years, felt immense. It was not the weight of the steel, but the weight of its purpose, now fulfilled. Her house was a humble, unassuming structure tucked away at the end of a narrow lane. It was the house her father, Ichiro, had built with his own hands after they had left their old life behind. The wood was gray and weathered, the small thatch roof neat and perfectly mended, her own work. It was a place of quiet, solitary order. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of straw, dried herbs, and old wood. She slid the door shut behind her, and the faint sounds of the waking town were silenced. Here, in the sanctuary of her home, the rigid control she had maintained for hours finally began to fracture. She leaned her back against the door, her legs giving way, and slid down to the packed earth floor. The wakizashi clattered softly beside her. She did not cry. The feeling was too deep, too vast for tears. It was a silent, internal collapse. She unwrapped the sash holding her sword and laid the weapon on a low shelf, beside a chipped teacup and a small, smooth riverstone her father had once carried for luck. She looked at the sword. It was not a part of her, it was a tool, a key she had used to unlock a door that had been sealed for 20 years. Now its purpose was done. Her body was a map of the duel. She unfastened her dark, practical kimono, her fingers clumsy with exhaustion. In the thin gray light filtering through the paper screen, she could see the angry red marks and deep purple bruises already forming on her forearms, a testament to the sheer, brutal force of Musashi's katana. Her shoulder ached with a deep, grinding pain where she had braced against a particularly vicious blow. She ran a hand over her collarbone, over the pale, starburst scar that had ended the fight. It felt no different than it had yesterday, but now it felt heavier, imbued with the power of a spoken truth. She moved to a large clay pot of water in the corner and ladled some into a basin. The water was shockingly cold against her skin as she washed her face and arms, hissing softly as the cold touched the tenderest of the bruises. The pain was grounding. It was real. It was proof that the night had happened, that it wasn't some terrible fever dream. After the abstract battle of honor and memory, the simple, physical reality of her aching body was almost a relief. She sat on her sleeping mat, her limbs trembling with a fatigue so complete it felt like an illness. She had entered the garden prepared to die. She had left it having shattered a man's soul. She saw his face again, not the enraged, arrogant mask he wore at the start, but the final, broken visage of a man drowning in a truth he couldn't escape. His shaking hands offering her his sword, the blood welling on his palms, his choked sobs in the dirt. There was no victory in that image, only a shared, devastating sorrow. She had set out to restore her father's honor, but in doing so she had been forced to tear down Musashi's. The cost of it settled in her chest, a cold, heavy stone. Her gaze fell upon an old wooden mallet hanging on the wall. Its handle was worn smooth, shaped by the grip of her father's hand and then her own. He had taught her the roofer's trade, the patient, rhythmic work of mending and making whole. "We protect people from the storm, Ruri," he used to say, his voice gentle. "There is honor in that. A roof that does not leak is a better promise than a lord's banner in the wind." She had kept his promise. She had weathered the storm. Sleep, when it finally came, was not a peaceful respite but a turbulent sea of fragmented images. The scent of jasmine and blood, the glint of moonlight on steel, the sound of her father's cough, the roar of a long-forgotten fire. She woke hours later, the midday sun casting a warm, dusty slab of light across the floor. The house was silent. The world outside was busy with the sounds of a normal day, the call of a merchant, the laughter of children, the rumble of a cart. The normality of it felt strange, alien. Her body screamed as she forced herself to stand. Every muscle was a knot of fire. For 2 days she did little but move between her sleeping mat and the water basin. She drank tea and ate a little cold rice, her appetite gone. She was healing, allowing the physical storm to pass. The bruises on her arms deepened into a tapestry of ugly purples and greens. But as the physical pain slowly began to recede, it left space for the deeper, quieter wounds to make themselves known. The duel had been the single driving purpose of her life for so long. Ever since her father's death, every sunrise had been a reminder of the unmet promise, every sunset a mark of her failure to see it done. Now, what? The land was not hers. Musashi's fate was unknown. The great defining question of her life had been answered, and she was left in the echoing silence of its aftermath. A profound emptiness began to creep in, a feeling of being untethered, adrift. On the 3rd morning she woke to the sound of rain, a soft, steady drumming on the thatch roof above her head. It was a soothing, familiar sound. It was the sound of her own work, of shelter, of safety. She sat up, her body still stiff, but the worst of the pain having subsided into a dull, persistent ache. The rain was washing the world clean. She knew what she had to do. She dressed in her oldest, most comfortable work clothes and tied her hair back. She found a small purse of coins, barely enough for a few days' food, and tucked it into her sash. Then she went to the wall and took down the wooden mallet. Its familiar weight in her hand was comforting, an anchor in the uncertain sea of her emotions. Outside, the town was slick and gray. The rain washed the dust from the streets and deepened the green of the moss growing on the stone walls. People hurried along under oiled paper umbrellas, their faces hidden. No one paid her any mind. She was just a roofer going to work. The anonymity was a balm. She walked not towards the market, but towards the poorer quarter of the town, where the lanes were narrower and the houses huddled closer together. She stopped before a small, dilapidated temple, one dedicated to a minor god of travelers. Its roof was a sad, sagging mess, with dark, damp patches showing where the rain was getting through. The old priest who cared for it was too poor to afford proper repairs. Ruri had noticed it weeks ago, a small, quiet failure in a world of larger ones. She found the old priest sweeping wet leaves from the temple steps. He was a wizened man with eyes that were cloudy with age but still held a gentle light. He looked at her, then at the mallet in her hand, and a flicker of hope crossed his face. "I have no money to pay you," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "I ask for no payment," Ruri replied, "only for some tea when I am done." Quote. For the rest of the day, Ruri worked. She climbed the rickety ladder to the temple roof, her movements sure and practiced, despite the ache in her limbs. The world fell away. and her focus narrowed to the task at hand. The wet, fragrant smell of the new straw. The satisfying rhythm of the mallet, a steady thump-thump-thump that was the opposite of the frantic clang of steel. The intricate weaving of the thatch, a skill that required patience, precision, and an understanding of how to make something strong and whole from humble, individual strands. Up on the roof, surrounded by the gray, weeping sky, she found a strange kind of peace. The physical labor was a meditation. With every bundle of straw she secured, she felt as if she were mending something within herself. She was not destroying, she was creating. She was not confronting, she was protecting. This was her father's honor. This was her own. The grand, violent drama of the duel seemed to shrink from this high vantage point. Down below, the world of men, with their pride and their swords and their broken promises, seemed small and distant. As the sun began to set, the rain softened to a fine drizzle and then stopped altogether. The clouds broke apart, and the last rays of sunlight sliced through, setting the wet rooftops of the town aglow with a fiery golden light. Rory paused, her work nearly finished, and looked out over the world. From here she could see the entire town spread before her, the imposing gray walls of the fortress, the bustling lines of the market, and beyond them, in the distance, she could see the flat, shimmering rectangles of the rice paddies. They were catching the last of the sun, glowing like sheets of hammered gold. She looked at them, and for the first time she felt nothing. No anger, no grief, no sense of a debt owed or a claim to be made. They were just fields, a patch of earth where rice grew. Their power, the hold they had over her and Musashi, had been a story they told themselves. The story was over now. The truth had been spoken. The honor was in the speaking of it, not in the ownership of the land. She had found her meaning not in winning the duel, but in surviving it. She had found her peace not in a samurai's promise, but in a roofer's work. Her future was not a piece of land. It was the open sky above her, the solid roof beneath her feet, and the quiet satisfaction of her own strong hands. She had walked into the garden to reclaim her father's past, but she had walked out of it with her own future. A gentle breeze blew across the rooftops, carrying the scent of wet earth and the distant sound of a temple bell ringing for evening prayers. Rory took a deep breath, and it felt like the first clean breath she had taken in years. She turned back to her work, picked up her mallet, and drove the last wooden pin into place. The roof was whole. The dust in the Shogun's archive, once a familiar, comforting blanket, now felt like a layer of fine gray ash. For days you had moved through the tall shelves in a daze, the scent of old paper and dry ink unable to scour the memory of jasmine and blood from your mind. The whispers in the fortress had twisted the events of that night into a dozen different tales, each more lurid and less true than the last. They spoke of the stable-keeper's drunken rage, of a lover's quarrel, of a mysterious assassin. No one spoke of honor or of a debt sealed in fire. The truth, you realized, was a secret you now shared with only two other people, and the weight of it was a physical presence in the silent, ordered library. Your work had become an automaton's task. You would unroll a scroll, record its title, and roll it back up, but your mind was elsewhere, in the broken garden. You kept seeing Musashi's blade cleaving the stone lantern, the two halves falling apart like a promise broken in two. You saw Ruri's exhausted stance, leaning against the wounded maple. Why there? Why that place? The garden's obsessive perfection, its cold, rigid symmetry, seemed the very antithesis of the messy, passionate human tragedy that had played out within it. The contradiction gnawed at you. On the fourth day after the duel, the answer to a question you hadn't yet dared to ask came looking for you. The paper screen to the archive slid open with a sharp, impatient rasp. A stern-faced man in the formal robes of a senior steward stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was Lord Nagano's chief aide, a man known for his thin lips and even thinner patience. "Librarian," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of courtesy. "Lord Nagano requires the original plans for the central garden, the blueprints, the costings, everything. The damage is considerable. An inventory of loss must be made before a restoration can be commissioned." Quote, your heart gave a familiar, cowardly flutter. This was official business. This was dangerous, but beneath the fear was a spark of something else, a fierce, burning curiosity. The very thing you had been obsessing over was now your assigned duty. "Of course, Steward-sama," you murmured, bowing your head. "The archives are extensive. It may take some time." "See that it doesn't," he snapped, before sliding the screen shut, leaving you in the dust-filled silence. For the rest of the day you searched. You pulled down heavy, leather-bound ledgers of fortress expenditures. You sifted through endless scrolls, detailing crop yields and tax collections. The official plans for the fortress were easy to find, great masterworks showing walls and keeps and barracks. But the garden, considered a mere aesthetic folly, was harder to place. You pushed deeper into the archives than you had ever gone before, into a back corner where the forgotten records of minor lords and dismissed officials were left to molder. The air here was thick and heavy, the smell of decay mingling with the scent of paper. It was in a dusty, worm-eaten camphor wood chest, tucked under a pile of requisitions for roof tiles from 30 years ago, that you found it. Not a grand blueprint, but a delicate hand-drawn scroll, the paper so brittle it threatened to crumble at your touch. You unrolled it carefully on your low desk. The plans were drawn with an artist's hand, the lines fine and precise. There it was, the central garden, with its perfect obsessive symmetry. And in the bottom corner, in a neat, elegant script, was the name of the overseeing lord, the one who had commissioned and supervised its creation 20 years ago. Lord Kenshin, Musashi's father. A chill traced its way down your spine. This was it. This was the beginning of the path. You stared at the plans, your librarian's eye, so accustomed to finding patterns in chaotic texts, searching for something more than just lines and angles. To the steward, this was just a drawing of trees and stones. To you, it was a message from a ghost. At first, you saw nothing unusual. 2 identical halves, mirrored across a central gravel path. The location of every pine, every juniper, every stone lantern was precisely duplicated. It was a testament to a mind fixated on order. But then you noticed the annotations. They were written in a smaller, fainter hand, almost like private thoughts not meant for the official record. Beside the drawing of the great black pine you had hidden behind, a note, a shadow deep enough to hide a child's fear. Asterisk near the koi pond, another. Let the water be still to reflect a memory without distortion. These were not a gardener's notes, they were a poet's, or a penitent's. Your eyes were drawn to the center of the plan, to the main path that bisected the garden. It was labeled simply, "The Dividing Line." And there, in the very heart of the drawing, was the sketch of the ancient stone lantern, the one Musashi's blade had shattered. But it was labeled with 2 words that made the air in your lungs turn to ice. Asterisk Ichiro's light. Ichiro, Ruri's father, the man who had shielded 2 children from a fire. The lantern was not just a lantern, it was a monument. A grave marker for a living man's sacrifice. The pieces began to fall into place. A terrible, beautiful mosaic of grief and intention. You saw it all. Lord Kenshin, stripped of his lands and titles, a broken man given a minor post in the shogun's fortress, is tasked with creating a garden. To the world, it is his penance, a demonstration of his newfound loyalty to the new order. But in secret, it is the only memorial he can build. It is his confession, the perfect symmetry. It wasn't about obsessive control. It was about 2 lives, 2 children. Musashi and Ruri, 2 halves of a single whole, forever divided and yet perfectly mirrored by a single traumatic event. The garden was a map of their shared history. The central path, the dividing line, was the night of the fire itself, the event that split their destinies. On one side was the path of the samurai's son, burdened by the ghost of a lost status. On the other, the path of the thatcher's daughter, burdened by the memory of a promise. They were designed to be separate, but forever reflecting one another. Every element was a word in a silent story. The meticulously pruned pines, their branches trained into unnatural cloud-like shapes, were Kenshin's desperate attempt to control the wild, chaotic memory of the burning forest. The raked gravel, with its wave-like patterns, was an ocean of unspoken grief, frozen and held in check. And the jasmine, the night-blooming jasmine, its scent only released in the dark, a secret that could only be understood at night. Kenshin had built a stage, a silent, living testament to the debt his family owed. He had created a sacred space to hold the truth of his shame and his gratitude. hiding it in plain sight, masked as a display of fashionable aesthetics. He could not speak of the debt, for it would have revealed his past allegiance and endangered both families. So he had built it into the very earth of the shogun's fortress, a story written in stone and leaf and shadow. Clutching the fragile scroll, you rose and walked out of the archive. The stern-faced steward was forgotten. You moved as if in a trance, drawn back to the scene of the duel. The garden was cordoned off, but you slipped under the rope, your heart no longer fluttering with fear, but beating with a steady, solemn purpose. You were not a trespasser. You were the one person who could now read the language of this place. You stood on the central path, the dividing line. To your left was Musashi's side. To your right, Ruri's. The landscape was no longer just broken, it was expressive. The duel had not been a desecration. It had been a performance, the violent, inevitable conclusion to the story the garden was built to tell. The two figures who had been separated by the garden's design for 20 years had finally met in the middle and shattered the false peace. You walked to the remains of the stone lantern, Ichiro's light. Asterisk Musashi's blow, aimed in rage and shame, had struck the very heart of his father's memorial to the man who had saved him. It was a symbolism so profound, so devastating it made you ache. He hadn't just broken a lantern, he had, in his ignorance, struck out at the very symbol of his salvation. And yet, in doing so, he had brought the secret into the light. The breaking of the lantern was the breaking of the silence. The sheared-off maple branch was not random vandalism. It was a wound on a living witness. The chaotic footprints on the gravel were not just a mess. They were the frantic, desperate script of a truth being fought for. The garden's perfect sterile symmetry had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion of peace covering a deep, unhealed wound. The duel, in all its violence, had been the necessary surgery. It had scarred the landscape, but it had made it honest. The broken garden was truer than the perfect one had ever been. You looked around at the ruin, and for the first time, you understood it not as a place of violence, but as a place of revelation. Lord Kenshin had not built a garden of peace, he had built a garden of memory. He had constructed a silent, patient prayer that one day the debt would be acknowledged, that the two halves of his story would find their way back to the center. He had died before seeing it happen, but the garden had waited. The stones and the trees had held his secret, held his hope, for 20 years. They had waited for the night when his son and his savior's daughter would finally play out the last act of the tragedy he had written into the earth. A breeze rustled the leaves of the wounded maple tree, and it sounded like a sigh of release. The garden's secret was out. Its purpose was fulfilled. It was no longer just a location. It was the story itself. A father's grief, a secret debt, and a desperate hope for honor, all hidden in the language of flowers and stone. You, the quiet librarian, had become its translator, and you knew that this broken, scarred, and finally honest patch of ground was the most important historical text you would ever read. You stand there, a silent figure in a broken world, the brittle scroll clutched in your hands. It is no longer just a plan. It is a confession, a testament, a father's final, desperate letter written in the language of landscape. The chill morning air raises goosebumps on your arms, but the cold you feel is deeper, emanating from the story that has unspooled at your feet. Your life, up until this point, has been lived in the margins of other people's stories. You were Tama Kawakami, the archivist, the manager of dust, a footnote in the grand history of the Shogun's fortress. Your defining characteristic was a quiet, persistent fear, a fear of loud voices, of important men, of making mistakes, of being noticed. Your world was circumscribed by the 4 paper walls of the library, a safe, predictable space where the past was neatly rolled up, catalogued, and stripped of its messy, dangerous life. Now that safety is gone, and you find you do not miss it. The fear is still there, a familiar hum beneath your ribs, but its quality has changed. It is no longer the small, scurrying fear of a mouse. It is the vast, soul-shaking awe of one who has looked into the heart of a star and has not been burned away. You have stepped out of the margins and into the very center of the text, and the revelation has not destroyed you. It has remade you. You look at your hands holding the scroll. They are the same hands that trembled when filing a misplaced document, the same hands that carefully brushed dust from the official histories of great samurai. Those histories now seem like childish fables. They speak of honor as a bright, hard, simple thing, like a polished sword. They speak of loyalty as a straight, unbroken line. They tell tales of heroes and villains, of battles won and lost for clear and noble reasons. They are lies. Beautiful, well-constructed, necessary lies, perhaps, but lies all the same. The truth is this broken garden. The truth is the mess, the scars, the chaos. True honor, you now understand, is not a shining blade. It is a scar on a woman's collarbone. It is a father's secret grief built into a garden. It is the agonizing choice to pull a killing blow at the last second. It is the courage to fall to your knees in the dirt and offer your own blood in payment for a debt you never knew you owed. It is a story so complex, so painful, and so profoundly human that it could never be written in an official scroll. It can only be written in the earth, in flesh, in the silent, shattering language of a duel fought in the dark. Your life as a librarian was a life of avoiding this kind of complexity. You preferred the neat conclusions, the sealed narratives of the past. Life was a scroll that, once read, could be rolled up and put away. But the duel has taught you that life is not a scroll. It is a living thing, a tangle of roots reaching back through generations. Musashi was not just a hot-tempered stable-keeper. He was a boy pulled from a fire, a son haunted by a father's silent penance, a man fighting a war against a history he didn't understand. His rage was not simple anger, it was the terrified roar of ignorance. And Ruri was not just a wronged woman seeking restitution, she was the keeper of a sacred fire, the living embodiment of a promise, a warrior who had to wield her grief like a sword because no one would listen to her words. To see them only as their occupations, as their station in life, as you once did, is to be blind. It is to read only the title of the scroll and ignore the epic poem written within. This, you realize, is the greatest lie of the world you inhabit, the belief that the rigid lines of class and duty define a person. A roof thatcher, a stable keeper, a librarian. The words are cages, designed to keep people in their place, to simplify them, to make their stories manageable. But you have seen what happens when the people inside those cages refuse to be contained. They shatter the perfect, symmetrical world built to imprison them. A new kind of power settles in your bones. It is not the power of a warrior or a lord. It is the quiet, immense power of the witness, the translator. You are the only one alive who can read this garden, who knows what Ichiro's light truly means. You hold the key that unlocks the whole tragic story. And with that knowledge comes a terrifying, exhilarating responsibility. The senior steward, Lord Nagano, the shogun himself, they see a damaged piece of property, a financial loss, a blemish to be erased and restored to its former false perfection. They want to rake the gravel smooth again, to replace the broken lantern, to pave over the truth with a new, clean lie. Your past self, the cowardly Tama, would have scurried back to the archive, handed over the scroll with a trembling hand and a bowed head, and tried to forget everything she had seen. She would have retreated back into the safety of the dust, allowing the real story to be buried forever. But that Tama died in the garden last night, somewhere between the hiss of a drawn sword and the final choked sob of a broken man. You roll up the fragile scroll, your movements now deliberate and sure. The brittle paper feels like a sacred text in your hands. This is not a property inventory for Lord Nagano. This is Lord Kenshin's soul. It is Ichiro's memorial. It is the birthright of Musashi and Ruri. It belongs to the story, not to the state. A decision forms in your mind, as clear and sharp as the edge of a new blade. It is your first true act of defiance, a quiet, librarian's rebellion. You walk back towards the archive, your steps firm on the gravel path. You do not scurry. You do not hide your face. You are no longer a ghost haunting the edges of the fortress. You are a guardian returning to her sanctum. When you reach the library, you do not immediately seek out the steward. Instead, you go to your own low desk. With the steady hands of a master forger, a skill you never knew you possessed, you take out a fresh sheet of high-quality paper, a pot of your best ink, and a fine-tipped brush. For hours, you work. You do not merely copy the garden's plan. You recreate it with a new purpose. You draw the pines and the junipers, the pond and the paths in perfect, symmetrical detail. You replicate the lines and the angles exactly as they appear on Lord Kenshin's original. You create a perfect, plausible copy, a version of the plans that is technically accurate, but spiritually empty. You leave out the annotations. You do not write asterisk, a shadow deep enough to hide a child's fear. Asterisk, You do not label the central lantern asterisk Ichiro's light. Asterisk. You create the document the steward wants. A map of things, not meanings. A lie. It is the most important piece of scholarship you have ever produced. When the copy is finished and the ink is dry, you carefully roll it and set it aside. Then you take the original scroll, Lord Kenshin's fragile confession, and walk back to the dusty, forgotten corner of the archive. You place it back in the worm-eaten camphor wood chest, tucking it safely beneath the old requisitions for roof tiles. You bury it, not to hide it, but to protect it. You are returning it to the dark, where its truth can be preserved. Some histories are not meant for the full light of day, not meant for the cold, unfeeling eyes of officials. They are meant to be kept safe, like embers from a fire, waiting for the one who knows how to read their warmth. You return to your desk and pick up the forgery. You hold in your hands a lie that will protect a truth. It is a strange and heavy burden, and it fills you with a sense of purpose, so profound, it almost makes you dizzy. You slide the archive door open and walk out into the fortress, seeking the steward. Your heart is beating, not with the flutter of fear, but with the slow, steady, powerful rhythm of a story that has found its keeper. You are Tama Kawakami, and your life's work has just begun. You find the steward in the main courtyard, overseeing the placement of a new decorative stone with an air of immense self-importance. He does not turn as you approach, forcing you to wait until he has finished instructing the sweating workman. When he finally deigns to look at you, his eyes are cold and impatient. "Well?" he asks, his voice sharp. Your past self would have flinched. She would have bowed low, stammering apologies for the delay. But she is gone. You stand straight, your gaze even, and present the scroll with a steady hand. "The plans for the central gardens, Steward Sama, as you requested." He snatches the scroll from you without a word of thanks, unrolling it just enough to see the familiar lines of the garden. He grunts, satisfied. "HMPH. See that you file this correctly when I am finished with it. The expense of this incident will be noted in your master's record." He turns his back on you, already shouting at a workman who had dared to pause and wipe the sweat from his brow. The dismissal is absolute. To him, you are nothing, a piece of furniture in the archive, and the scroll is just a tool for calculating a cost. He cannot see the lie in his hands. He cannot feel the ghost of the truth you have just protected. You turn and walk away, his grating voice fading behind you. You do not feel small or insignificant. You feel a strange, calm lightness, the quiet triumph of a secret well kept. You return to the archive, your sanctuary, but as you slide the paper screen closed, shutting out the world, you realize it is no longer the same place. The air is still thick, with the familiar, comforting scent of old paper and cedarwood, but it seems thinner now, less substantial. The towering shelves, with their thousands of neatly rolled scrolls, no longer look like a repository of all knowledge. They look like a forest of silent, carefully constructed lies. Each scroll is a life, a battle, a generation, smoothed out, simplified, and stripped of its messy, inconvenient truths. Here is the official history of Lord Kenshin's downfall, a dry account of a failed rebellion with no mention of the fire, the children, or the life debt. Here are the tax records that list Ichiro as a thatcher, his name just a line of ink, with no hint of the warrior he once was, no whisper of the sacrifice that defined him. The perfect order of the archive, the very thing that once made you feel safe, now feels suffocating. It is a symmetry as false and as fragile as the one Lord Kenshin built in his garden. This whole fortress, this whole world, is a carefully raked garden of gravel, and you have just witnessed the violent, beautiful chaos that erupts when real life refuses to be paved over. The dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight seem like the ghosts of all the stories that were never written down, the silences that scream louder than any recorded battle cry. You run a hand along a shelf of scrolls, the smooth paper cool beneath your fingers, and you understand. You are not a keeper of history. You have, until now, been a custodian of omissions. And so, as we leave our librarian standing there, forever changed in her silent kingdom of paper, let us draw the curtains on this journey into the past. Let us step back into our own time, into the quiet of our own rooms, and reflect on what became of the lives that were shattered and remade in that moonlit garden. The story of the duel, of course, was never officially told. It was smoothed over, buried under the steward's reports of vandalism and the fortress's endless gossip. But the truth of it, like a stubborn root, continued to grow in the dark, changing everything. Musashi was never seen in the fortress stables again. The day after the duel, he walked out of the main gate, a man stripped bare. He signed the deed to the 3 rice paddies over to Ruri's name, the official document, a stark, simple acknowledgement of the debt. He left his father's sword, the symbol of his false pride, behind in the loft, taking with him only a common blade, his work clothes, and the crushing weight of his newfound knowledge. His legendary wanderings did not begin as a quest for glory or for the perfection of his swordsmanship, as the popular tales would have you believe. They began as a penance. He walked the earth not to prove he was the greatest swordsman, but to understand what it meant to be an honorable man. Every duel he fought, every life he took or spared, was weighed against the memory of a woman he almost killed and the father who had saved him. His anger was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet melancholy, the sorrow of a man forever trying to repay a debt that had been settled in fire before he ever learned to hold a sword. Ruri, for her part, accepted the deed to the land. She did not work the fields herself, but leased them to a tenant farmer, the small income providing her with a security she had never known. But her life did not change. She was not a woman who craved the status of a landowner. She had not fought for property. She had fought for a truth to be seen. Her victory was in Musashi's kneeling form in the dirt, in his final, broken acknowledgement. She continued to live in her small house, to climb the roofs of the town, her mallet striking a steady, peaceful rhythm. She remained a woman of quiet, profound integrity, her honor not something to be proclaimed, but something to be lived, woven into the thatch that sheltered others from the storm. She and Musashi never met again. Their shared history was a scar, a memory of a single, terrible night that bound them together forever, even as it sent them down 2 separate paths. And Tama, our cowardly librarian? She became the most important character of all. She became the keeper of the real story. She worked in the archive for another 40 years, a quiet, unassuming woman whom no one ever really noticed. But she was a guardian. She protected Lord Kenshin's fragile scroll, a secret held in the heart of the fortress's official lies. She understood that vengeance is a fire that consumes the one who wields it, that true honor is not about defending one's pride, but about fulfilling one's promises, even, especially, when it costs you everything. She learned that betrayal is not always a grand, malicious act, but can be a slow, creeping silence, a failure to see the history that stands right in front of you. She understood the garden. She saw that its perfect, fragile symmetry was a prayer for an impossible peace, and that its destruction was not a tragedy, but a consummation. It had to be broken for the truth to be let out. In our own lives, we build these perfect gardens. We rake the gravel of our daily routines into neat patterns. We prune our histories into acceptable shapes. We create an illusion of order to keep the messy, chaotic truths at bay. But life is not symmetrical. It is wild, and painful, and beautiful. And strength, true enduring strength, is not the power to maintain the illusion. It is the courage to walk into the broken places, to face the chaos, and to see the honest, difficult beauty that is revealed there. It is the strength of Ruri, facing a blade with only her story. It is the strength of Musashi, surrendering his sword and his pride. And it is the strength of Tama, who learned to protect a single, fragile truth in a world of powerful lies. So as you drift off to sleep, think of the secret gardens in your own world. Think of the quiet stories that are not written down, the debts of the heart, the sacrifices no one sees. They are the histories that truly matter. And perhaps, if you listen closely, in the silence of the night, you can hear the faint scent of jasmine, the whisper of steel on stone, and the enduring truth that the most profound battles are fought for the honor of a promise, under the light of a patient and watchful moon. And now, let the world of swords and fortresses, of moonlight and promises, begin to soften at the edges. Let the sharp lines of the story blur and dissolve, like ink bleeding into soft, wet paper. Feel the weight of the tale settle, not as a burden, but as a fine, soft dust, coating everything with a quiet and profound understanding. The frantic beat of the duel has long since faded, and the silence it left behind is no longer a silence of shock or of waiting, but a deep and resonant peace, the calm that follows a storm that has washed the whole world clean. Let your mind drift back, for just a moment, to that archive, to the still, quiet air that holds the scent of ages. See Tama, our witness, standing in the shafts of sunlight that pierce the dusty gloom. The false scroll is delivered. The true one is hidden. The rebellion is over. It was not a rebellion of armies clashing in a field, but a quiet internal revolution of a single soul. Feel the calm that settles over her. The frantic, fluttering bird in her chest has finally folded its wings, its purpose found not in flight, but in the patient act of guarding a nest. The great, heavy shelves of official history no longer press in on her with their immense weight. They have become a forest, and she, a knowing spirit of the woods, moves through them with a new and gentle grace. She understands their nature. She knows that the grandest trees cast the deepest shadows, and it is in those shadows that the truest, most delicate things are allowed to grow. The fear has not vanished, but it has transformed into reverence, a deep and abiding respect for the fragility of truth, and for the quiet strength it takes to keep it safe. Let the image of the archive dissolve. Let the walls become translucent, the shelves fading into mist, and let us float, gently, back into the garden. But this is not the garden of the immediate, violent aftermath. Time, like a slow and patient gardener, has been at work. Years have passed. Decades. The rain has come and gone 1,000 times, and each drop has helped to wash the memory of blood from the gravel. The stones are no longer a chaotic mess of footprints. They have settled, softened, their sharp edges worn smooth, and a fine green moss has begun to trace delicate patterns over them, a new story written in the patient language of nature. The broken stone lantern, Gon-Ichiro's light, has not been replaced. No official ever deemed it important enough, and so it remains, a monument not to violence, but to resilience. The two halves stand, cleaved, but not fallen. In the deep, jagged crack where Musashi's blade struck, life has taken hold. A vibrant carpet of moss, thick and plush as velvet, now lines the wound. A tiny fern has sprouted from its heart, its delicate fronds unfurling in the dappled sunlight. The lantern is no longer just a broken thing. It has become a cradle, a symbol that even from the most violent rupture, a new and gentle life can emerge. It holds its light no more, but it holds a deeper meaning. It teaches a quieter lesson now, a lesson of healing. And the maple tree, the silent witness whose limb was so cruelly sheared. Look closely. The scar on its trunk is still there, a pale, gnarled knot in the bark. But around it, the tree has continued to grow. The bark has curled and folded over the wound, protecting it, incorporating it into its being. And from just above the scar, a new branch has grown, slender and graceful, reaching towards the sky. In the autumn, its leaves turn the most brilliant shade of crimson, a quiet, yearly acknowledgement of the fire in its past. It does not hide its wound. It has grown around it, and in doing so, has become more beautiful, more complete. The whispers of the duel have long since faded from the air, replaced by other, softer sounds. The gentle murmur of the wind through the pines, the low hum of a bee investigating the new blossoms on the jasmine vine, the soft, liquid plop of a koi surfacing in a still pond, its scales a flash of living gold. The garden is no longer a stage for human tragedy. It has reclaimed itself. It has absorbed the story, digested the pain, and transformed it into a deep and abiding peace. Its perfect, false symmetry is a distant memory. Its new beauty is the asymmetrical, unpredictable, and honest beauty of life itself. A beauty of scars, of resilience, of things that were broken and have learned to grow again in a new and unexpected shape. Now let the figures of our story begin to fade as well. Let them become as soft and indistinct as watercolors left in the rain. Musashi is no longer a man with a blood-stained sword walking a dusty road. Let that sharp image dissolve. He becomes a feeling. The feeling of a great weight being carried with purpose. The ache of a long journey. The quiet resolve of a soul seeking not victory, but balance. He is the cool stone at the bottom of a river, worn smooth by the relentless current of his own penance. His anger has long since dissipated into the vastness of the world, and what is left is a profound, quiet strength, the strength of a man who has faced the ugliest part of himself and has chosen to spend his life atoning for it. He is a whisper on the wind, a name in a half-forgotten tale, a lesson in the high cost and ultimate value of humility. And Ruri, our roof thatcher. The image of her, defiant on the gravel, her short sword a sliver of desperate light, also begins to soften. She is no longer a warrior. Let that image go. She becomes the feeling of a steady hand, The quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The scent of new straw in the rain. She is the gentle, persistent rhythm of a mallet, not destroying but creating, mending, making whole. Her grief has found its final resting place, transformed into a deep, compassionate understanding of the world. She is the safe roof that keeps out the storm, the quiet integrity that needs no audience. She is the proof that the greatest honor is not found in grand gestures under the moonlight, but in the small, consistent acts of good faith performed in the simple light of day. Let her dissolve into the feeling of peace, of a promise fulfilled and a purpose found. Tamatu, our witness, our keeper. Let the image of her in the archive fade into the soft light. She is the feeling of a secret held safe, the quiet rustle of old paper, the patient, enduring presence of memory itself. She is the understanding that some stories are too sacred for the noise of the world, that some truths must be protected, guarded, and allowed to rest in the quiet dark. She is the silent guardian at the gate of history, the one who knows the difference between what was written and what was true. And now, even the garden itself begins to dissolve. The mossy lantern, the scarred tree, the still pond, let them all melt away into a soft gray mist. The scents of jasmine and pine and damp earth fade, replaced by something simpler, closer. The cool, clean scent of the night air in your own room. The sounds of the fortress, the distant bell, the watchman's call are gone, and all that is left is the gentle ambient hum of your own quiet space. Feel the story release its hold. It has given you its lessons. It has shown you its heart. Now it recedes, like the tide pulling away from the shore, leaving behind only the smooth, clean sand. The weight of the tale lifts from your shoulders. The complex emotions, the anger, the grief, the shame, the triumph, all dissolve into a single, simple feeling of calm. A deep and settled peace. Bring your awareness to your own body. Resting here, now, feel the weight of the blanket over you, a gentle, reassuring pressure, like a hand laid softly on your shoulder. Feel the coolness of the pillow beneath your head, a soft cradle for your thoughts. The great dramas of the world, the duels and the debts, can be set aside. They are stories for another time. Tonight, the only story that matters is the one of your own rest. Turn your attention to your breath, a quiet, gentle rhythm, as steady and as natural as the turning of the seasons. There is no need to force it, no need to control it. Simply notice it. The soft, cool whisper of the air as it enters, bringing with it a sense of calm, of quiet, of release, and the gentle, warm sigh as it leaves, carrying with it the last remnants of the day, the last echoes of the story, the last clinging thoughts. Each breath in is a wave of peace washing over you. Each breath out is a letting go, a gentle surrender. Let this calming whisper of your own breath be your guide. Let it lead you away from the world of thought and into the quiet, boundless world of sensation. Feel the tension in your shoulders begin to soften and melt away. Like snow in the gentle spring sun, feel the muscles in your jaw unclench, the space between your eyebrows smooth out. Allow your hands to rest, your fingers to uncurl. You are safe. You are at peace. The battles have all been fought. The promises have all been kept. There is nothing left to do now but rest. The darkness behind your closed eyes is not an empty void. It is a soft, deep velvet curtain, warm and inviting. It is a quiet garden of its own, a space of perfect, gentle silence. Allow yourself to sink into it, to drift upon it, as you would on a still, calm lake, under a sky with no moon, only the faint, milky light of a billion distant stars. Let the last vestiges of the story become those stars, tiny, beautiful points of light in the vast, peaceful darkness, too far away to analyze, their stories told, their light a gentle guide into the deep peace of sleep. There is only the soft whisper of your breath, the gentle weight of the blanket, and the deep, quiet invitation to let go, to drift, to dream. The night holds you, the silence keeps you. Rest now, just rest.